Lars Andersen. But first off, I'd like to say by saying kudos to the man. We got to say it, and we need to give it to him. He has talent. He's really good with the bow. The thing is, though, that he often talks about medieval archers, medieval warfare, war bows, and accuracy, historical accuracy. So the thing is, the real question should be, when we look at the way Lars Andersen uses a bow, when we see Lars Andersen archery, is that an accurate representation of medieval war archery? My quick answer is no. Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. So, cut the long story short, let's get right to the point. Thing is, I've written down quite a lot of things because Lars Andersen, and I imagine most of you know about him, but for those who don't, he's a really talented archer. He shoots, most of the time it's like rapid shooting and precise targeting. So this man, he posted a few videos. He's got a YouTube channel. He's not a YouTuber, he's a researcher, I believe. He posted a few videos, the first one of which I think went rather viral, over 44 million views. And then he recently posted again, talking again about historical archery and how it compares with modern day practice target shooting. Now the thing is that since it's the first time on my channel that I talk about him, I'd like to sort of review both videos very quickly. So we're going to look at both Lars Andersen and the way he shoots and the way he uses a bow, and compare it to how actual medieval war bows were used, completely different kettles of fish. I believe, okay, just my humble opinion. And secondly, we will see some of the things that we hear on these videos, some of the statements that are made, and see if they can be actually backed up historically, or if history tells us a different story. Now, the very first thing I'd like to address, which I believe is the most important one of all, is draw weight. Now, the sort of bow that Lars is using is a very weak bow. Now, I'm not an expert on bows. I think Matt Easton from Australasia is. I'd actually would like to hear his opinion on this. But the thing is that I don't know how weak the bow he's using is, but it's definitely weak. Maybe 35 pounds of draw weight, not quite sure. But the thing is that when we look at medieval bows, when considering draw weights, I want to say 80 pounds is minimum, 70 pounds maybe. But if we go into actual English longbows, like for example the 137 bows that were found in Mary Rose, the ship which sank in Portsmouth in 1545, which belonged to Henry VIII, you know, the Battle of Agincourt, many other battles that are often linked to medieval warfare and the way war bows were used, then I'd like to say that those sort of bows, we are looking at between 100 to 180 pounds of draw weight. So the sort of bows then we see when we think of medieval war bows, we're talking about powerful weapons that were not built to shoot rapidly, like he does, but weapons that were built for power and penetration. So when we see all the things that he does, from an artistic point of view, I think they are absolutely spectacular. But from a medieval research point of view, I found them to be as relevant as target archery is, to be honest. Because even just focusing on the point of anchorage, and we will have a look also at the sort of grips he uses and many other things, you know, arrow on the left, arrow on the right, all these things that he's brought up, of course, in these videos. But even if we look at the anchor point, which is really, really close, and then we compare that to actual medieval sources where they tell us that the archer would put his entire body into the bow. As a matter of fact, a bow was a very difficult weapon to use if you were not trained, and when we're talking about actual medieval war bows. And it is very important, dramatically important, that we talk about medieval war bows, because if we don't, then why mentioning war at all? Because if you take a target shooting bow, for example a Victorian target shooting bow, and you use that on a medieval battlefield, even if you use the actual bow that he's using and you use that on a medieval battlefield, then it's not going to be able to be effective. We're going to see that. I know that on his original video and on his new video, he often shows how he shoots at armor, etc. I'll get to that as well, because I do have something to say about those representations too. But again, anchor point in real medieval war bows were all the way down up to your ear, if not even further. Okay, so you had to put your entire body, and that's why medieval archers were not cheap. And as Matt Easton eloquently pointed out, of course they were cheaper than knights and men-at-arms, but they were still expensive, more expensive than militia, more expensive than crossbowmen. And the reason being that you needed many years of training, not only to be accurate, like he shows, but also to be able to have the strength, the muscular strength, to use one of those heavy poundage war bows, which were essential for medieval warfare, considering the sort of armoured foes that you had to fight against. In other words, contrary to popular pop culture and popular understanding, in order to use a bow, the most important characteristic is strength, not dexterity, like in video games and role-playing games. Archers needed to be strong, or at least strong in those muscles which are involved during drawing. So to reiterate before moving to the next point, if you shoot like this, you're not going to penetrate anything. Those sort of archers are not going to be effective. Second point, to back up this statement that I've just made, why wouldn't he be an effective archer? I mean, he can throw so many arrows, and we have heard from historians and some people repeating this thing of 12 hours per minute, 12 hours per minute. That's the minimum rate of shooting, should we say, during medieval battles. If you can't do that, if you're not quick enough, you're useless. In fact, he says that himself. A stationary archer who can't shoot very quickly is a useless archer. Well, no. An archer who shoots all his arrows is a useless archer. Because again, one thing we don't take into consideration is the fact that regardless of whether you put your arrows in your quiver or whether you hold them in your hand, left hand, right hand, like he points out on his videos, if you run out of arrows, you are useless. The bow becomes a completely useless weapon. Yes, archers could also use swords, of course. I'm saying useless as a bowman. Shooting all your arrows as quickly as possible is probably not a very good tactic. Now, on his original video, I believe he talks about where you put your arrows, so the sort of idea of quivers in the back and all that sort of situation. I'm not an expert on quivers, but the thing is that if you look at, again, medieval documents, which I'm going to reference quite a lot on this video, mind you, because I just love doing that, to be honest. I'm going to see some folios from the Morgan Bible. I'm going to see how archery is represented in medieval manuscripts. But if we look at that, we see many different things, because he says basically that archers, the best way to carry your arrows is actually hold them in your hand, and if you can hold them with the right hand, it's actually you're like a really good archer, etc. Yeah, I'll give him that. Yes, arrows were also carried by hand, but arrows were also put in a quiver, in a quiver on your hips. We also see arrows carried this way, but most importantly, one thing he never mentions is that many arrows were also just put on the ground. When you have arrows on the ground, it means that the archer is stationary. So with that, I'm not saying that I'm completely going against this idea of a moving archer is much more effective, but I'm saying that since he says that stationary archers are completely useless, I would say that is very dependent on the situation and what's going on. If the archers have a good point of shoot, if they found a good point where they can shoot from, possibly from a higher area, and they, for example, from a hill, and they're shooting down at the enemy, there is no reason for them to just keep on moving and running away and running around. And also, particularly because if you think of the Battle of Agincourt, for example, the Battle of Azincourt, we know that the cavalry had no effects, but one of the reasons why the cavalry, but there were many reasons why the cavalry had no effects, but sometimes during these battles, some of the things that happens is that archers created actually palisades and lots of different obstacles to prevent cavalry to reach them, for example, because of course if cavalry reaches archers, it's havoc. So again, when you have palisades, excuse my pronunciation, when you have lots of defensive arrangements around you, then archers shouldn't really move that much, again, if you have a point of advantage. And another example of that is during sieges. During sieges, which are very interesting in manuscripts actually, we see archers using bows in two different ways. We see archers shooting down from the towers, and we see archers shooting up again to the towers. And curiously, and this is again kudos to Matt Easton for noticing this and bringing it up, but it is during sieges in manuscripts and medieval iconography that it's the only example where we see archers actually pointing up. So that is the only case in which we know archers did this sort of movement, whereas that goes against the popular concept of archery, where we see this. In fact, he does mention this on his video, where he talks about this idea of archers shooting all together. I'm going to say that's a good point. It wouldn't really make sense from a lot of different point of views, but also what he fails to say on that video is that actually the idea of archers shooting up and then having this cloud of arrows raining down on the enemy also doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. For example, first, no evidence whatsoever. Again, the only examples of in iconography, medieval iconography, of archers pointing up is during sieges. In all other cases, it's just pointing almost point blank at the enemy, sort of flat shooting. And also because if you throw an arrow like that first off, it's going to lose quite a lot of power. Secondly, when they're having these rains of these showers of arrows, they're doing it from maximum distance, which means minimum power. Again, pointless if your opponent has got even a gambeson, to be honest. And then again, if they rain, it means that most likely the most probable target is going to be helmets. And again, a helmet. What are you going to do against a helmet, possibly a pointy helmet with an arrow? It's just going to glance off. On his original video, we see that he shows how he can penetrate very quickly mail armor and gambeson put together. But I hate, literally, these tests on armor. And again, it's not like he only did it back then. On the new video, again, I'm not going against the man, okay? Again, mad respect for the man, but I hate these tests. And on the new video, again, we see this Indian-made cheap stainless steel armor just advancing towards him, and he just shoots at it. And with these tests, not only you're not achieving anything, because you're not telling us what sort of arrowhead you're using. Was it a bodkin point? Was it a flathead? What kind of arrow point are you using? Arrowhead. You're not telling us about, again, the draw weight of the bow. You're not telling us anything about the armor in question. Who made it? How was it made? What sort of metal? Is it iron? Is it steel? If it's steel, what about the amount of carbon? Is it heat treated? We know nothing. We don't even know if the mail is riveted, to be honest. And if it's not riveted, then it's completely waste of time if it's buttered mail. Because again, I am not aware of any archaeological discovery or finding of buttered mail in Europe. Even if we go all the way back to the Romans, never mind medieval times, it's always riveted, and in the case of the Romans, we half riveted, half solid, most of the times for lorica hamata. And also, mail, there are a lot of different kinds of mail, there are a lot of different kinds of possible meshes. Are we talking about 4-in-1, 6-in-1, how many rings, how dense is the mesh? There is too much variation, so that test not only is not proving anything, but it's actually making people think, look, an archer can just kill everyone, all soldiers wearing armor. That's the information you're giving, that's the public impression you're giving, and it's wrong. Not to mention that the very concept of arrows versus mail, and then again arrows versus plate, is a massive topic. It's a huge debate, and loads of people have brought up different arguments and ideas, and it's still not completely settled. They keep talking about how all armor has its weakness, but again, the only armor that... do you even realize how massive the topic and argument of armor is? We're going from 11th century Norman nasal helm to 15th century full plate armor, and all armor's got its weakness. It sounds like the film Robin Hood with Kevin Costner. He actually says that to one of the boys, because I remember this scene. It was a very interesting one. It's a good film. There is Robin Hood, and he's in the forest, of course, and he's talking about getting revenge, and he's like, no, let's riot, let's go against the sheriff of Nottingham. And while he's doing like, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that, and take this over, and we'll do this, and we'll beat them. And of course, one of the lads there, and I would say rightly so, says, but we're talking about warriors with swords and armor. And Kevin Costner actually sort of hugs this little boy and says, I can teach even this little boy how to go through armor, sort of, how to bypass armor, how to, the weak point of armor. Easier said than done. Easier said than done. And sure, yes, there are weak points in armor. In fact, there are some sources which talk about how some men-at-arms during, I want to say the Battle of Agincourt, I'm not quite sure if it's Battle of Crécy or Battle of Agincourt, sometimes I get confused, but I do know that there are some examples of men-at-arms actually getting worried about how the side of their visors are getting penetrated by arrows, and that is because, of course, we know that good quality armor is not the same thickness all over the place, but you only have thick areas, for example, the areas that are normally deemed or esteemed to be more important, to be actually the more exposed. So of course that meant they wanted some changes in the design of their armor. So I'm not saying that armor does not have weak points. Of course it does have weak points, but if we talk about 11th century armor and we talk about late 15th century Italian armor, then they are so different, so massively different, that just showing that you can go through a cheap Indian great helm which is like this big eye slit doesn't prove anything. Although again, it's a remarkable thing to be able to do. It's amazing. He even shoots an arrow inside an arquebus, I believe, or a sort of gun. So what he does is amazing. I'm saying I would never be able to do it, even if he gave me 10 lives to try. Having the knight moving really slowly towards you, and you just do this, it achieves nothing if you think of actual medieval warfare. And then I've actually written this one down. I've got to read it. if war archery is so fantastic, then why was it, and blah blah blah, and then there is a question. But the funny thing is, when he says this, when he's talking about war archery, historical archery, we see Lars Andersen shooting at a machete that was thrown at him. Now, excuse me, but was that a common thing during medieval battles? Because if it was, then I must have missed something. Like people, actually Metatrons throwing their machetes, which I didn't even know they had, to archers, and archers having to intercept the again, I know it's amazing to show his ability to do that, but, linking that to how amazing war archery was, I don't think that actually that was something that was commonplace during medieval battles. So to reiterate, Lars Andersen, excellent performer, but he's not a fair analogue to a medieval archer who would, as I said, store as much energy as possible into the bow, which means, of course, a slower rate of shooting in order to gain more power and penetrative power. Now, he also says some things that I agree with, like he talks about how archery can also be used at close range. Absolutely, I totally agree. Actually, in medieval treatises, we see a lot of times that happens, although with medieval treatises, we've got to be careful. So let's move now into, because we've got a lot of things to say, let's move into the topic of the arrow. Should it be on the right? Should it be on the left? Now, he claims that the arrow should be on the right and the arrow on the left is a misunderstanding of and a misconception which comes from modern day archery, which has developed into a completely different thing. Now, given modern archery is completely different to medieval warbow archery, but I think that statement is too bold, because if you look at medieval treatises, you see both. It's just as simple as that. You see, they only show pictures of medieval treatises which show arrows on the right. Now I can show you loads, I'm going to show you now loads of images which show the exact opposite, some of which are from the Morgan Bible, which is one of my favorite sources, normally used for when I talk about armor, but today we're going to talk about archery, so check this out. So as you can see, I don't think you can dismiss arrow on the left so easily, particularly when considering Mediterranean grip with the, either whether it be 2 fingers or 3 fingers. I don't think you can. And maybe if we're talking about the one with the thumb, the thumb grip, then I could understand, particularly if we're talking about mounted archery, like for example Mongolian, etc., and Eastern way of shooting, and in fact the whole thing with the ring, protective ring, and if we've played Age of Empires, you have heard of that. So we do know that they use the thumb to draw the bows, but again, these bows have lower draw weight, particularly if you're talking about Mongolian bows. But what I'm trying to say here is not that easy to dismiss as a concept. But on the other hand, we need to be careful with actual manuscripts and artistic representations, because again, I have seen representations of battles, medieval battles, where you see all the archers of the left, on the left, having their arrows on the right. Okay, so like he says, but then all the archers on the right having all the arrows on the left. So how is that possible? What, did they have like some sort of national pride? Of course not. That's just for artistic purpose. I mean, my father is a painter. I know that sometimes he makes certain choices because they just look better, or because it's an artistic convention perhaps. And on the other hand, again, to back up this point, although I love these sources, we do still need to be careful. I mean, look at this picture, for example. So should we consider penetrating a male hauberk of a knight with a sword, which is not even particularly pointy, so easily done? Should we believe this representation? And most importantly, would it be that enjoyable of an experience, I wonder? So again, some of the things he brings up, interesting, and also the idea when he talks about, if there is a knight coming at you, of course you shoot the horse. Absolutely, that happened. Horses were shot into pieces during medieval battles. We know that happened. Although we do need to take into consideration sometimes they were armoured, so again, not easier said than done. Anyways, this is what I wanted to say about Lars Andersen. It's a man that I highly respect and I hold in high esteem for the things that he has achieved as a performer. But again, linking that to medieval warfare and the fact that he does, basically, he links those sort of performances to medieval warbow archery, then I think that it is a long shot. But please let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm really eager to hearing your opinions and your ideas, and I wish to thank you for your time, of course, and thank you for watching as always. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.